I love Nico Collins. I love Stephon Diggs. I love Tank Dell. Someone isn't going to hit. I'm sorry. Someone is not going to hit in the Houston Texans wide receiver room. We've only seen this situation happen one single time. You're going to see a lot of videos of players that you should draft this year. Well, how about the guys that you shouldn't draft? Because that's maybe just as important, if not more important. We're going to talk about 5 players I'm going to leave on the draft board for my league mates to draft here in 2024. First name, by the way, I don't dislike any of these names. It's just the price for most of them. First name, DJ Moore. DJ Moore is a guy that I absolutely love on our Dynasty channel. I still am all in on his career. However, this year, I probably will not be drafting much DJ Moore. There's a couple things at play here. Number one, he's relying on a rookie quarterback to produce for fantasy football. Caleb Williams might be the best rookie quarterback we've ever seen. Okay, that might well be the case, but that's a difficult thing to project. And in the last decade, a rookie quarterback has produced a top 12 fantasy wide receiver finish 8.3% of the time. So if you were thinking there's a top 12 upside finish for DJ Moore this year, just know you're making an 8% bet there. How about top 24? Well, in the last decade, a rookie quarterback has produced a top 24 wide receiver finish 29.2% of the time. Right now, on average, DJ Moore is going off the board as the wide receiver 20 in fantasy football when you combine ESPN, Sleeper, and Underdog drafts. So you are making a bet when you're drafting DJ Moore that has hit 29.2% of the time in the last decade if you're expecting him to be a top 24 wide receiver. If we're looking at a 12-man league, this is where you have to pick DJ Moore on average across those different formats. For ESPN, he's priced at the 410, which is actually pretty reasonable, to be honest. Sleeper at the 311, a little too high for me. Underdog at the 307. And on average, between all three of those sites, you got to take him around the 401. So he's a late third, early fourth round pick. And we have to consider that DJ Moore this year has more competition for target share than he's ever had in his career. In Carolina and Chicago, this is the most talented wide receiver room he's ever been a part of. And last year, he dominated target share because he was the only one in Chicago. He had over 28% of the team's targets. He had 30% of the team's receptions. He had almost 40% of this team's total receiving yards, and he had over 42% of this team's receiving touchdowns last year. More competition than he's ever had. And when I talked about those hit rates earlier, remember, top 12, 8.3% of the time, top 24, 29% of the time with a rookie quarterback. What we didn't take into context there is that with those players who hit, those wide receivers who hit, they were the clear number one on their team and they had no competition like DJ Moore has currently. So ultimately, I love DJ Moore. He's super talented, but I don't think I'm going to be drafting him in fantasy football this year. And if Caleb Williams ends up being a superstar out of the gates, I will regret that. But that is not a bet I'm willing to make. All right, the second player that I'm avoiding, honestly, it's really a group of wide receivers. That is Nico Collins, but it really is like the Houston Texan wide receivers in general. I am a little bit hesitant to draft these guys this year. If you look at a 12-man league on ESPN, Sleeper, and Underdog, we got him going at the 312 on ESPN, the 305 in Sleeper. The 205 on Underdog is insane. And on average, between those three sites, he's going off the board at the 303. And every Sleeper draft I'm in, he is a second-round pick. I have not seen Nico Collins fall past the 305, but this is ADP that we are looking at. So look, at the moment, let's talk about it. This entire wide receiver room is getting drafted as if no one is going to bust, right? Nico Collins, on average, wide receiver 14. Stephon Diggs, on average, wide receiver 18. Tank Dell, on average, wide receiver 26. Do you guys know how rare it is to have 3 wide receivers from the same team be drafted inside the top 26 of the position? That almost never happens. And for good reason, because it's so difficult for those guys to return their ADP. So I guess we have to ask the question, has it ever worked out before? Like, have 3 guys from the same team ever been drafted in the top 26 at the position and it's worked out? Like, has that ever happened before? Well, in the last 5 years, we've only seen the situation happen one single time. That was in 2019 when Brandon Cooks was drafted, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp all in the top 20 of fantasy football. And if you look at where those guys finished in 2019, Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 62. However, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp both hit Now, Brandon Cooks did miss some time with a concussion, so I don't know what that would have looked like if Brandon Cooks was healthy. But what I'm trying to tell you guys is someone isn't going to hit. Like, I'm sorry, someone is not going to hit in the Houston Texans wide receiver room unless CJ Stroud is an absolute god. Like, someone's going to miss. It's just like, it's not going to happen. So you better be extremely confident you know which Houston wide receiver is going to pay off their draft price this year. Because look, like Nico Collins is uber talented. The only reason I brought him up is because he's the most expensive of this group. But I believe you can make a case for any of these guys being the number one wide receiver in Houston. For Nico Collins, he averaged over 17 points per game, got a contract extension. Great. For Tank Dell, he became a starter for this team in week 8. And in that stretch before he got injured, averaged over 20 points per game. Actually more than Nico Collins. And if you look at Diggs, like that completely wrecks the way we project this offense, because you can't expect 17 points per game from Nico when Stephon Diggs is now in town. Why? Well, because Stephon Diggs in the last 4 years averaged over 160 targets per season. And we've seen Stephon Diggs produce along prime Adam Thielen, so we know he can demand targets with really good wide receivers. Look at what he did in 2018, where he averaged almost 18 points per game amongst prime Adam Thielen. So like, look, here's my point. I love Nico Collins. I love Stephon Diggs. I love Tank Dell. I cannot make that bet as early as I need to make it because history tells me one of those guys are going to bust. Nico Collins is the most expensive. I could be looking like a fool. I get it, but I'm just not willing to make that risk so early in a fantasy draft. All right, the third player I am probably not going to be drafting this year. And this is interesting because last year, this was a my guy for me. This was a my guy. I was locked and loaded. Really loved him. You can check out the screenshot from last year's my guy video. But this year I'm out. It's James Conner. Here is why the tables have turned for me on James Conner. So I'm looking at ADP from last year to this year, and I'm thinking, well, they added Trey Benson in early round 3 this year in the NFL draft. Surely James Conner's ADP has fallen from last year to this year, because last year there was no one like Trey Benson in his backfield. Well, he's actually more expensive this year than he was last year. This is my problem. This is my fundamental issue. I was in on James Conner last year. I thought he was a huge value. He's more expensive this year, and they added Trey Benson. If you look at his ADP, his final ADP in 2023 versus his current ADP in 2024, on average, he's going 3 spots higher amongst the running back position. And if you look at a 12-man mock, I actually think that is not all that accurate because right now ESPN is saying that James Conner is the 7-12 in a 12-man league. I don't buy that whatsoever. In ESPN, running backs are going higher than these other formats. I believe when it's actually time to draft, like September, I think you're going to have to get James Conner in the 5th or 6th round in ESPN drafts. And ultimately, that is not something that I'm willing to bet on because what happens this year when James Conner goes down with an injury and you got Trey Benson waiting in the wings? In James Conner's Cardinal career, I beg you, tell me a single time where he had a running back like Trey Benson waiting for him to go down and get an injury. He has never had a running back like that waiting to take the job from him. And we know James Conner's a lock to miss time. According to Injury Shark, James Conner's never played a full season, missing 24 total games over the last 7 years. Their injury predictor gives Conner an 88.4% chance of an injury and a projected 2.8 games missed. Those are the 5th and 12th highest marks amongst running backs in their system. Guys, it's no longer Keontae Ingram, Eno Benjamin, Chase Edmonds type of guys on this depth chart. If James Conner's out for 3 or 4 games, Trey Benson has a legit chance to steal this job or at minimum become super annoying if you own James Conner. So I love the guy, but it's all about price. And unfortunately, I'm priced out of paradise for this year. All right. How about a tight end and a quarterback? That's what we're going to finish on with these next 2 takes. David Njoku. I really like David Njoku. What a badass he was last year for playing after burning half of his face. That is maybe one of the most badass things that happened all the 2023 season, okay? But if you're looking at a 12-man league, right now, David Njoku, the 804 on ESPN, the 801 on Sleeper, the 905 on Underdog. I think Underdog has this one right personally. And on average, you got to take him in the middle of the 7th round. Here's my biggest concern. Let me ask you the question, okay? You guys tell me. Tell me in the comments right now, okay? When has Deshaun Watson ever produced a top fantasy tight end? Ever in his career? Has it ever happened? Well, if you look at the 3 seasons where he's been a starter the entire season, on average, tight end 25. No one has even had a top 15 finish for him as a fantasy tight end. And Watson and Njoku have just never clicked together in Cleveland. They have never had chemistry or a mind meld. It's just not worked out. In 2022, Watson's first year in Cleveland, if you look at in splits, that's with Deshaun Watson. Out of split, that's without Deshaun Watson. So we see David Njoku averaging about 2 more points per game without Deshaun Watson. Well, how about 2023? Okay, well, in split with Deshaun Watson, out of split without Deshaun Watson, averaging 15 points per game without Deshaun Watson. That shouldn't happen. When your star quarterback goes down, you should be much worse for fantasy. But every single year so far, David Njoku's been better without Deshaun Watson. He just doesn't prioritize the tight end position, unfortunately. And this year, the Browns have added competition for targets. This team traded for Jerry Jeudy in the offseason, who has averaged about 6 targets per game in his career. So ultimately, I love David Njoku. He was so fun with Joe Flacco, but there's just no evidence to point to us saying, well, we can trust David Njoku as our starting tight end. I mean, he's never averaged anywhere over 10 points per game with Deshaun Watson, so that's scary to me. And the last player, I've talked about this before. I've gotten hate for it before, but I'm still going to stand strong. I am going to let my league mates draft CJ Stroud. This doesn't mean CJ Stroud's going to be bad this year. It doesn't mean he's not a good quarterback in the NFL. He's a fantastic quarterback in the NFL, maybe the best young quarterback in the entire league. If you look at a 12-man league, though, right now, you got to take this guy so early if you want him in fantasy football. On ESPN, the 502, early 5th round pick. On Sleeper, he's the 406 according to ADP. I think Underdog, again, has it right here at the 611. And on average, between those 3 sites, you got to take him at the 506. Ultimately, for me, there are just far too many options that I think are going to give you very similar points per game this year, and you can get these guys way, way cheaper down the draft board. For example, Joe Burrow, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy. Why am I comparing these guys? Because I think they're all going to score fantasy points similar to how CJ Stroud will. They are all pocket passers. They are all going to rely on passing touchdowns for fantasy. None of these guys are going to give you rushing upside in fantasy football this year. None of them are going to rush for 1,010 rushing touchdowns, all right? And why I compare these guys again, all are on high-powered offenses with talented weapons around them. CJ Stroud has Collins, Dell, Diggs, that whole group. Jordan Love has Jaden Reed, Watson, Dobbs, Wicks, Jacobs, Musgrave, Kraft. You got Brock Purdy with Ayuk, Debo, CMC, Kittle, Pearsall, Joe Burrow with Chase, Higgins, Burton, Moss. He's got a great, great group of weapons around him. All of these guys do. And I project them to have a similar points per game in 2023. And last year, CJ Stroud wasn't the highest scorer of these names anyway, right? Last year, Jordan Love and Brock Purdy both scored more points per game than CJ Stroud did. And as far as Joe Burrow goes, he had an off season, but the 2 years before that, he averaged over 20 points per game. Ultimately, isn't that what you want CJ Stroud's, ceiling to be? But the biggest difference is price, okay? This is why I'm out on CJ. It's all about the price. CJ is going 23 picks ahead of Joe Burrow. He's going 40 picks ahead of Jordan Love and 57 picks ahead of Purdy. As far as team construction goes, you're going to have to take CJ in the 5th round. We talked about this. Joe Burrow, though, you can take in the 7th round. Love, you can take in the 8th round. Purdy, you can take in the 9th round. Imagine the team you could build around those other names instead of spending a 5th round pick on a guy like CJ Stroud, who again is going to have to score a ton of touchdowns, excuse my language, to return that sort of ADP compared to these other guys. So those are some players I'm just not in on this year. I'm curious to see the comments. I know, I'm obviously not going to hit on all of these, but I hope you can respect the rationale as to why I'm not in on these players. And that's the video, guys. I appreciate you for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.